And welcome to episode 36 of the Brewed Sages, Stormbound players with a head for the game. I am Freeloader, and with me, as always, is Subaiku. Subaiku, how's it going tonight?
Fantastic.
We are the Brewed Sages, easily the second best Stormbound related podcast in production. And as a reminder, you can always follow us at Brewed Sages on Twitter, or for all of you who ever wanted 2 tickets to paradise, our email address is thebrewedsages@gmail.com. So, Subaiku, we have a bunch of community news put together, compiled by our fantastic sports correspondent, Dirk. I'm going to do my best to fly through this as quickly as possible because we have a boatload to talk about tonight. We don't want to miss any of this community news, but we do need to leave some room to talk about. I don't know if you heard, but there's some changes coming to the game.
What, really?
Yeah,
That's
I know.
incredible. I should read about that while you go through this update from Dirk.
There we go. All right, so you read up. Here we go. All right. Draftbound is now in its 4th week. It just ended. This contest has been very fun so far and refreshing. A lot of people are still enjoying it, both new Equals players and veterans. Dirk has spared us from naming all of the winners from weeks 2, 3, and 4 since the last episode with a tourney update only covered week 1. Here are the recurring winners so far. Grim, Mac 313, Forever Zero, Arthas Rue. Honestly, not surprised by a single name on that list. They're all fantastic players.
All fantastic Equals players and ranked players, and congrats to all of them.
Indeed. Moving on from there, we have the Collector's Joust. It just ended after moving slowly for the first few weeks. Winner, Dennis. His first ever first place finish. Congrats, Dennis. The first Faction Wars season, since it started up again, is almost over. 1 week left. Winter has dominated the first week, but Shadowfan managed to pull back quite well in week 2. Swarm and Ironclad aren't doing so well so far. Faction Heroes has now turned into a weekly contest as well. The way Faction Heroes works, if you don't remember, is as follows. All participants have 1 week of time to win as many matches as possible to become the faction hero for their faction. After that, all the participants who are not a faction hero get to challenge the heroes and gather as many points as possible, but you are only allowed to use a single deck against all heroes. We now have a tournament called the Craft and Draft Tournament. In this tournament, players try to predict which cards their opponent is going to use. For every correctly predicted card, you are allowed to choose 1 card the opponent has to put in their deck. After that, you and your opponent draft decks by taking turns to pick 2 cards at a time from a card pool decided before the drafting process starts. Little complex on that.
Yeah, no, it sounds great, though. I would like to see all of the participants here pick our terrible cards of the week. Make sure that those are included in their opponent's deck.
All right, moving on from there. You know what, Dirk, you gave us a little sneak peek of for the next 2 upcoming tournaments? Are you tired of all contests being held with level 1 cards and 10 base health? Well, stay tuned. There is a hint. Kitty's new book opening simulator, which you can find, of course, on stormbound-kitty.com. All right, deep breath. Recenter ourselves. We have patch notes.
Yay!
I know. So let's get through. We have a bunch of balance changes, Subaiku. Well, we're going to read them in a slightly different order than from in the patch notes to try to make them flow better for our podcast. So please bear with us. Let's start with the nerfs. Subaiku, walk me through the nerfs.
Yeah, the first nerf, Ironclad getting hit once more, but a very minor nerf, very minor. Destructobots now can inflict damage to friendly structures as well as friendly units. So before, if you had a structure on the board but no units, you could play Destructobots and be safe that you were going to suffer no ill effect from the on-play effect. Now, if you do have, say, an unstable build that you tossed at your front line, just kind of lock down the front, it'll take 1 damage from your Destructobots. It's not a huge change, but it's a good change. It just makes Destructobots slightly worse.
Yeah, my first reaction to this was congratulations, all you Ironclad mains. Sheepyard Clause has come 6 months early. Enjoy the free fusion stones. Now that I think about it a little bit more, though, one of the things that has struggled or has challenged me at times is when my opponent is playing a level 5, let's say, true shot, and my siege breakers is only level 4. Those kinds of like single point differences when I'm below my opponent really hurt from time to time. They're really impactful for the game. So this is kind of like that, right? It's just we're gonna take one of your towers and we're going to turn it into a level 4 instead of a level 5, or a level 3 instead of a level 4, whatever. I think it matters.
It does. Look, one strength does matter. The difference between level 4 and 5 or level 3 and 4 or whatever, it can make a big difference, especially when you're trying to play in something like the Heroes League where punching up is harder and being
Mm,
on equal footing with your opponent is more important. I said unstable build earlier. That's the first one that came to mind for me because it's the structure I definitely see the most, even
sure.
after the nerf that it just received.
Yeah, because it's the cheapest tower. I mean, that's still the fact.
And the fact that now it can take one damage from destructor bots means some of the time maybe it lasts one less turn on the board, right? And that
Hmm.
makes a big difference. Maybe they drop it at 9 strength, it takes 3 points of damage on their turn and it goes down to 6. They play destructor bots and it goes down to 5. Now all of a sudden it's something you can clear for 1 or 2 mana.
Right, right. Yeah.
It's I think that this
It's
change
not
is
huge.
minor. Right.
Yes, it's
I
not
want to make
huge.
that clear. Very minor change, but it's just enough that I think that it does help.
And frankly, I mean, if you want to give some credit to Sheepyard, here's a space in which I think they've done very well, which are minor yet impactful tweaks to cards that don't remove them from play. They don't get nerfed out of existence, but the overall combined power level just kind of comes back into the fold a little bit.
I agree. I agree. And speaking of nerfed out of existence, let's talk about the change to Counselor Ami.
I spoke too soon. Okay, well, walk me through this.
Counselor Ami will now consider surrounding units instead of surrounding enemies with regards to the strength growing ability that it has. Now,
Mm,
this is not impactful on 3 mana, 4 mana when you're just trying to build Ami up. Where it makes a difference is late game when you're trying to get those 3 or even 4 Ami plays per turn. Now, all of a sudden, stacking Ami up to a point where it's unreasonable and clogging the board is a lot harder. You need to have more front, you need to have more room to operate. So, this should limit the growth without changing the core mechanic, which we do like. I think we are both on record as saying it's really neat, it's really fun, it's really interesting, and it's unique. We like all of those things about it.
yeah, I mean, taken at face value, right? Like one of the things that I always look at whenever I see anything like this is I say, well, what's the edge case, right? So the edge case is I've got 99 mana, the board is empty, but I've got front. And in that case, I've just reduced by 50% the number of Amis I can play that turn. Is if my math is correct? Unless there's some sort of like hexagonal closed pact lattice structure we can create with it. I'm pretty sure that just cut Ami in half.
Yeah, I think in general use, instead of being able to say play Ami on every available tile on your baseline, now you can only play it on every other tile.
Right. And that matters because if the point of playing an Ami deck is trying to ramp that Ami up as quickly as possible till it becomes just too big, reducing by 50% the number of times you can play it per turn means two things. One, it's growing slower, and two, you're likely floating mana.
Right. And so, in order to not float mana, you have to play things in your hand that are not Ami, right? You have to be able
Mm-hmm.
to keep your front advanced. You have to be able to still play cards. So, I think the incentive here is to play things that aren't Ami, to move your front and then play Ami behind it. So, instead of playing Ami 3 times a turn, you're playing maybe like 2 Amis and gifted recruits and green prototypes say, right? You just want to be able to move your front, clear some stuff out of the way, and then play Ami behind it without sacrificing the strength gain that you've been building up for the game.
Right. I think that this is in response to a deck that our very own Arthas Rue may have put out there. He was achieving something north of 80% win rate, I believe around 85% win rate with it. Luckily, not too much of the meta got hold of the build and how to play it right, because that would have been a bit oppressive.
Look,
So,
Arthas has always been good. I mean, look at the Chunk Beam or the Greedy Zuri decks he used to play. He's
sure.
always been good at those beefy mid-range slash control decks where he's controlling the board through positioning, and this fits right into his wheelhouse for sure. Uh, but also, I don't know if you've been on the Stormbound subreddit lately. It is probably somewhere around 98% complaints about Ami,
Well,
at
sure,
least
but
until the patch notes were released, and then it's somewhere around 98%. Thank you for nerfing Ami.
I, look, the problem that I have with complaining about Ami is that Ami on its own doesn't turn a game, right? Like, I can't use a giant Ami to take over the board. I need other things to keep my opponent at bay until I can sort of craft a giant Ami, right? Build it behind the lines. Um, and so it's to me, like when I've looked at Arthas's builds that he's proposed, they look excellent, but I've always looked at them and said, okay, if I took out Ami though and put in Zuri, how much worse of a deck would it really be? Like, yeah, maybe it doesn't achieve quite the same win rate, but it's not night and day. Ami isn't. Ami is the inevitable conclusion, the win condition of that deck that is otherwise being won by things like Edric and Loris and Beasts of Terror or what other AoEs you're using. And so, as much as I'm glad that this means that Ami's going to maybe be blamed less, you're still losing those games if your opponent is playing something other than Ami, or likely losing those games if you were going to lose to a giant Ami. You'll just lose to a very thick Ami now.
I don't know about that. I do think that this is a significant change,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it really does limit the growth, and it limits, there's a big difference between playing a 10, 11, and 12 strength Ami on the same turn and just playing a 10 and 11 strength, as
See,
well as using some other stuff.
that's where I actually disagree. The difference is in how you feel. You watch your opponent do a 10, 11, a 12, and a 13, right? That was just, what is that, 25 and 21? That was 46 health put on the board on that turn. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't come back from that. And you're right. My point is if your opponent played Edric plus two Amis, right? In the other order, likely. But your opponent plays 10 and 11. That's 21 plus another, I don't know, whatever it is. You're probably not winning that game either. If they have the ability to play four Amis, they still have the ability to play two Amis, which means you're not pressuring their baseline. And if you're not pressuring their baseline, they have room to play other things as well. Sure, it's not more Amis, and maybe psychologically it feels better, but you're still losing the game. Like, if an Ami can be played, you're not winning.
Yeah, I think we'll have to agree to disagree on that. I do think that it does make a difference not being able to play as many in those critical turns, and especially I'm thinking like around 9, 10 mana when you're looking to just overwhelm your opponent and stop them from being able to advance their front at all, really, right?
Sure.
You're looking to just clog up the middle of the board and say, "This is it. You're done." Now, these Amis on the board, you can trade into them one at a time if you want to, but eventually they're going to reach your baseline and the game is over. Now, is that's a lot harder? Is that even feasible anymore? I don't think so. Being forced to stagger them across the board makes a big difference.
It does. It does. But yeah, I mean, no, I agree that it won't be the same. All I'm saying is, in the vast majority of times, if your opponent was able to play four Amis, then they had control of the board. Those situations were not generated usually by Ami. They were generated by the rest of the deck, and the rest of the deck is still there.
I don't know. All I can say is even games where I managed to play four Amis in one turn, I still often lost. So, in my point of view, this nerf is completely unnecessary because I could never get Ami to work anyway. But I understand that at lower leagues, they definitely needed to do something to keep Ami in check. I understand that higher leagues, Brajoja mentioned specifically that there were high win rate decks in the Heroes League that he thought would spread and would be very difficult to contain if they didn't make a balance change. So,
Sure. No, and I
and if
agree
that
with
is
all
the
that.
case, obviously, we don't have access to the data that Sheepyard has. But if they thought that that was the case, then I'm glad that they made the change to rein it in now, even though it's only been a month.
Oh, no, I totally agree with all of that. I actually am not of the opinion that this buries Ami or makes it unplayable. I actually look at this and think, well, yeah, maybe you have to play some other stuff along with Ami on some of these turns, but on the turn that you could afford to play two Ami mana wise and you were able to before, you probably still are playing, I don't know what it is, GP and two Ami that turn, right? Like it is what it is kind of a thing. Later in the game, maybe that deck looks to add something like Bucks, so you can go Ami Ami Bucks kind of a thing. I don't think that this wipes Ami off the deck, off the face of the game, is what I'm trying to say. I agree it's powered down, but the posts I saw on Reddit in terms of just like look at this board, I'm just looking at it and I'm going, man, if they were able to play half those Amis, you were already out of the game. Like all they're doing is rubbing it in at this point. They won, 8 Amis ago.
That's very fair, and I am interested to see if people can come up with something that still works. If Ami is still viable,
Yeah, I think it will be. I,
we'll see
I,
what
I
Arthas
still
comes up
maintain,
with.
right? Exactly. I still maintain that Zuri's better, and now I'm more
Uh,
sure of it.
Now, definitely, Zuri is better in the more aggressive style that I prefer, for
Mhm.
sure. But long term, in theory, Ami is better. We'll see if we can get there.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on from there. We have some updates to the confusion mechanic.
The biggest one here is Sly Boots, which now forces a unit that has been confused by itself to move after it confuses it.
Hmm.
So kind of like a Sweet Cap and Hair Raising Cats combo together, although it doesn't make the unit attack, which is what Hair Raising Cats does. If there is a unit immediately to either side of the confused unit, left or right, it will potentially move into that unit and attack it, but it will not move backward. It works like a normal confusion rather than like an attack. It remains the same 4 mana, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 strength, one movement unit that it's always been.
But now, blessedly, it doesn't move into the the unit and just die, which was one of the problems that we had with it before. Was I'm going to confuse this thing right in front of me and then crash into it.
Which is, yeah, it's something that it always did and made no sense whatsoever.
Right. So
Now I'm very happy that this is a little more viable.
the weird thing though is since the confusion wears off after the move, what you're basically doing is you're saying, hey, unit in front of me, I want you to either side so that I can take that square. This game, positioning matters so much that I think that's actually fairly valuable, but I don't know how to quantify it.
It can mess up your opponent's plans. It can work kind of like a mini Loris, where if your opponent has multiple units next to each other, you can make them attack each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's necessarily strong, but it's budget Loris, and Loris is very good.
Yeah, it won't. Again, reminder: it won't attack backwards. So it's only good if your opponent's units are left and right of each other or towers. It will, like a rock workers, for example. You can use it to just erase the rock worker and the tower. If rock workers was ever played again.
Well, think about Mia next to a true shot, right?
Sure.
You can,
Yeah.
if they're bordering each other left and right, you can make Mia attack the true shot and then still
Mhm.
have hopefully some mana left over so you can finish off the true shot.
Yeah, the one thing I am a little bummed about is just the lack of synergy with hair raising cats. Now if I use Sly Boots I confuse a unit, it moves to the side, and then it loses the confusion. So now my hair raising cats doesn't do anything.
Yes, that is true. Although Sly Boots never really had synergy with hair raising cats because, again, most of the time Sly Boots was attacking the unit that it had just confused anyway.
Oh yeah, that's true. But like if it was a giant Dawn Sparks, as an example, on their baseline, which happens sometimes, that wasn't the worst
Mostly just
thing.
in the Brawl.
Yeah, I know. All right, moving on. We have another confusion update.
And this one is Excited Mousers, up from 3
Mm.
mana to 5 mana, and strength increases from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 up to 5, 6, 7, 9, 11. This is a reversion of the mana and strength to what it was about a year ago. Excited Mousers, I don't know if you remember, a long time ago got changed from 5 mana to 3 mana.
Was it a 9 and 11 health back then as well? Do you remember?
I believe it was, yes.
Huh, okay.
But now the buff here is removing the condition of needing close friendly units. The ability now counts all friendly units on the board instead of surrounding friendly units. So the ability here will now confuse surrounding enemies, and it will confuse the number of surrounding enemies as you have friendly units on the board. So before, the geographical positioning that you needed to pull off in order to have friendly units and enemy units in close proximity to confuse the enemy units was ridiculous. It was so hard to pull off. It really only worked on your baseline or on your opponent's baseline.
It also often meant that your units got destroyed. Like you know what I mean? Like anytime that you actually managed to, it was like a bad game of Twister. Everything just crashed into everything.
Yeah. And now you can just say, look, I'm playing my units up at your baseline, and then defensively, I'll drop this slide boats on my baseline, confuse your units, stave off your aggression for a little bit while I'm setting up my own counterattack. It's viable for sure. I don't know necessarily how viable. It's still difficult to play a 5 mana that doesn't move.
Well, yeah, but if you're playing, so if your opponent has you like somewhat base locked, and you place this 5 mana on your second row, it's doing double duty, right? It's preventing damage and it's acting defensively.
Yep, that is true.
But it's just a lot of mana to be playing. See, I think of confusion still. I think of confusion in two ways. I think of confusion, sweet cap and hair raising as an aggressive. I'm putting units on your baseline anyway. You're gonna trade into them. You're gonna have remnants. I'm gonna get damage off of them. And then I think of the rest of the confusion cards that are out there more controlling. And this one definitely falls into the more controlling, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels especially at 5 mana, it feels more like a control card.
It doesn't feel like an aggressive card. That's for sure. I mean, I can't help but compare this to Fluffy Bad Boxers, which is 5 mana but does move
Right.
and still confuses most of the time your opponent's units to stall out their aggression. But at least it's because it has movement, it's a little more flexible. It can
Right.
attack, it can defend.
But the problem that I have with Excited Mousers in a control deck, when does a control deck have a bunch of random units around the board, right? Like,
Well, sometimes your aggressive opponent will ignore your units and move past them. So
okay,
you'll have some extra lying around in the middle of the board, and that enables this combo.
maybe. All right. Okay.
When
No,
would you rather play this in a control deck over Void Surgers? Is maybe another question.
since the requirement of 3 enemy units was added back in, it has been difficult for me to really find good Void Surger value. I've tried playing it a few times, and it's only usually good when I'm already winning.
It's pretty situational, but then again, so is this.
Right.
Would you rather play this over Loris at the 5 mana
No,
slot?
no, 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 no,
Would
no,
you rather
no.
play this over Ubis?
In a specifically focused confusion deck.
Probably still not.
No, I
Now, to
don't
be fair, we're
really.
trying to compare a rare to a legendary, and
One
that
of the
maybe
best in the
is,
game.
and maybe that's not fair.
I also can't decide, is this a nerf a buff, a burf? We made it more expensive
A
with bigger
balance
stats.
change.
Yeah, I'm just trying to just, but I understand why the change to the effect. I like the change to the effect. This is now a card that could see use if confusion gets picked up as a, valid, viable in the meta kind of mechanic. I don't understand the increase in mana cost and the subs. Like, I understand why you give it more stats with the mana cost, but why?
I think the increase in mana cost is because it's too easy to combo when it's 3 mana. You're too likely to get value out of it, and apparently they don't want you to get value out of it that consistently.
But it makes it like that's the big problem with confusion decks, right? I feel like confusion's a really interesting, fun mechanic, but getting the combos is a little too difficult and too situational.
Well, and right now, really, the only viable combo is Sweet Cap and Hair Raising, and Melodious has never been really particularly good. All of the other confusion causing cards are kind of too expensive, too unreliable, or both.
Right.
And that's kind of where we are now, like with Excited Mousers. Sly Boots is actually just better than Excited Mousers right now. I think it still confuses. Well, actually, no, I take that back because Sly Boots only works on bordering
Bordering,
units,
not
not
even surrounding.
surrounding. So even then, like it's just very limited. It's like Sheepyard has this idea that confusion is going to be too powerful or too disruptive if they let it go unchecked. So even these buffs are really very minor, and I don't think they do enough to make the mechanic itself any better.
So I'm gonna go back several years because now that we're both over 40, I have every right to always talk about the golden years. Back when we used to play Hearthstone, for a while, Blizzard experimented with this concept of Treant Druid. Um, they kept giving us cards that created treants, that spells that put them in play, spells that changed minions on the board to treants, like all kinds of stuff, and then things that buff treants. It was like they really wanted everyone to experiment with and try to create a viable meta deck that was centered around treants. And it never got there. But they kept trying. Like it was like 4 or 5 expansions in a row. They would give us one card or 2 cards, never all of them at the same time, which was part of the problem. I think at some point it might have been possible to create it if all the cards were in standard simultaneously. And at this point, I kind of feel like we're there with confusion. We keep making changes, we keep making improvements, and I almost feel like the thing to do at this point is to just try it out for a month, overpowered. Just whatever it is that you think, well, we don't want to get there. Like for example,
Which let the
let them
floodgates
move.
open.
Yeah, open the floodgates for a month. Try maybe confused units can move left, right, or back.
Oh
Give it a
gosh, that would
shot.
be terrible.
Try it for a month. Is it really that good? Is it really that powerful that we have to try to tight walk our way around it? My gut tells me it's actually not as good as people think it would be.
I think moving units backward on a consistent basis
No.
would be too good. But I don't think that making the confusion cards cheaper, making the confusion cards a little more reliable to trigger and to play with would be bad. I think that it would be perfectly reasonable to have a bunch of
Well, it depends upon what
three
your
and
goal
four
is.
mana confusion cards.
If you just took all the confusion cards and you made them a little cheaper, you entice rush decks to add a little dose of confusion into them. Because, well, why not, right? It's the same stats, cheaper mana. The effect is just a bonus.
Well, and you know what? I gotta go back to that because we had a 3 mana excited mousers and nobody still played it just because the only way to take advantage of it was to play hair raising cats on the same turn, right?
Correct.
There's only one card that reliably takes advantage of the confusion mechanic, and that's hair raising cats. Melodious, like I said earlier, is just not very good. It's good in some situations, pretty good, but it's also just 4 mana. And now you're talking about a minimum 6, 7 mana that you have to spend with a situational payoff. Like you can't really do that. at least with Sweet Cap and Hair Raising Cat, you're only spending 5 mana. You're not sacrificing strength for the mana cost. And the upside is pretty good. It's worth it that you can kind of take that hit and put it in your deck if you want to take advantage of that mechanic.
Right.
Excited Mousers, I'm not putting that in my deck unless I'm really trying to run a deck centered around confusion. And it's just not viable enough to make me want to do that.
Right. So that's why I'm saying just make it viable. If confusion was 33% left, 33% right, 33% back. If it's on a side, it's 50% inward, 50% back. Boom. It's probably, to your point, overpowered. But are we sure? Because boy, we've tried everything else. So
Yeah.
I would suggest that it might be the only thing that actually brings it into viability. And if from there you need to increase mana costs or decrease power, strength of the units, okay. But as it stands, I think the mechanic itself is just not reliable enough that it really matters what we do to the cards.
I don't know. I think maybe the cards aren't there to support the mechanic. Like I like the mechanic. I think it works well enough. I did spend some time right after they changed the mechanic playing a confusion deck, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually I pared it down to just Sweet Cap, Hair Raising Cat, and Fluffy, and
Fluffy.
that was
Yep.
it. Because nothing else really worked. None of the other cards were good enough.
But what you just said is I took the cards that were decent enough tempo, the cheaper cards with good stat lines, mechanic be damned. And I tried to make the mechanic work when it could, but the rest of the time, at least I was playing vanilla cards with decent stats. To me, I hear the mechanic's not working. The mechanic isn't powerful enough. The only cards worth playing are the cheap ones with good stats.
Yeah, you might be right on that. I don't know.
So,
I do like the mechanic and I understand why they keep coming back to it over and over again, but I agree. It's kind of time to go whole hog and see does it actually work or not. If
you know
it
what?
doesn't work, then just stop messing with it.
Make it a brawl. Take the confusion, add additional all confused units. Maybe they don't go backwards, but two side by side confused units have to attack each other. Something like that. Just whatever you want to do to the mechanic to give it the extra gas it needs. Try it in a brawl 1 week. See what happens. Why not?
All right.
All right. Move on from there. We have some fun updates to the temples to walk us through, Sabaiku.
Yeah, the Temple of Space will now only destroy the older copy
Mm,
instead of both temples. And the Temple of Focus will no longer deal self damage when it pushes units ahead. I think we're both on the same page here. This is kind of how they should have functioned from the start. The
yes.
Temple of Space losing 2 copies meant you spent 6 mana just to move units around the board, and that's just not viable. Now you're spending 6 mana to move units around the board, but you get a structure out of it on either end. You can set up your combo, and your opponent trades into the temple, fine. You've at least gotten some value from playing the structure on the board. If they leave it, you spend 3 mana and you move units somewhere else on the board, somewhere more advantageous for you, I assume. Uh, and
I hope so.
and the temple just stays there, holding your front, blocking
Yeah.
your opponent. It makes a lot more sense.
Hmm.
And then Temple of Focus, it never really needed to be on a clock. I think if you got to the point where you were sticking a Temple of Focus and your opponent couldn't clear it, you're probably winning that game anyway. Making it only last for a few turns instead of permanently doesn't really change anything.
No, no, this is fine. I mean, these are both, I think, exactly the way that they should have been released. I don't mind again, like I don't mind that Sheepyard doesn't want to rock the boat too much. So I don't mind that they introduced them maybe a little underpowered. I'm glad they made the change. The only feedback I would give is just this is a good change. You could have made it a month after the release. I think we kind of figured out pretty quickly that space just lacked value, and focus is what it is. The power tick isn't really doing anything.
Yeah, but as a legendary and epic rarity on both of those, I got to
Hmm.
imagine it took quite some time for them to get enough data to understand how the players were really using them, if they were viable.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, the economy of the game being what it is, you just don't get that many games being played with either card. Yeah. Okay. No, you know what? I will get right behind that. I'm glad that the changes are being made because I think these are now better cards. I don't think either of them elevates to a meta-defining card, but they
No.
both can be played.
Yep.
And then we have one last update, one which actually I am pretty happy about because I thought you could do this from the start, and I was surprised when you couldn't. So we have a winter update.
Random snuck in there Spellbinder Shyvana ability change. It will now trigger off of friendly units as well as opponent units. And
Hmm.
right now, the only way to freeze your own unit is to play in Ice Flakes. So you can play Ice Flakes, destroy it, turn that 2 mana Ice Flakes into 4 mana. Hopefully that works out well for you. I'm not too positive on this one. This is not something that seems to have a lot of immediate impact to me, but
Um, I
I,
think it
I,
does.
it allows you to cycle through your deck more quickly, which is often very
Correct.
viable. So I'm sure it'll get played in that situation.
Well, look, there are times where if you're playing like a mid-range to controlling deck, there are times where you've got a Jev turn with freebooters, and really your only goal is to try to jazz up as much mana as you can for that. And it lets you have another proc, like mid to late game. I've got Icicle Burst and I've got Frost Hexers. Now I've got a third. It's in the deck anyway. It's the least ideal of the three, but when you need it, it's just good to have.
Yeah, maybe it gives you a little more consistency with your Shyvana.
Mhm.
Make sure you always have something to combo with it. But
Well, yeah, if you're trying to combo that with freebooters, it's a really hard three cards to find together. This way, it's two cards you have to find together and any one of three others, and that's just easier.
that's fair. Um, it's I think you lose a lot of the value from the Shyvana. What you're trying to do with Shyvana is you're trying to not just gain extra mana on your turn, but also the tempo play of removing your opponent's unit. Right, like
Correct.
that's not an insignificant part of the value that Shyvana provides. Is that you're taking a unit off of the board and turning it into your own 4 mana unit.
No, no, for sure. Like I said, it's not the most ideal of the three, but card cycling being what it is in the game, I actually think that this is helpful at times.
Helps you get to that MERS token faster.
Exactly, or harvester token. It is worth noting that it's only on the turn you play it that the ice flakes is frozen. It unfreezes itself to start the second turn, so you'd only be able to do it by playing both on the same turn, so mana 6 or later.
Yeah, my first thought when I read this was, oh, in a mirror match, my opponent freezes my unit. I can clear my frozen unit and make a lane for runners, and then realize, no,
Nope.
it thaws at the start of the turn. That just doesn't work. There's right now no use case other than ice flakes for this, which leads me to believe that there's something else going on, and in the future we're going to see a new card that maybe takes advantage of the freeze mechanic a little bit more.
Yeah, like for example, in On Death, right? So I'm playing against you, Subaiku. I play a unit that on death freezes all surrounding enemy units, kind of a thing. And I place it defensively. I hit go at the start of your turn. Your units walk into it, pop it, and freeze everything around it. Now there's no room for runners. Haha! And you'd be able to Javana away one of the units and make room for a runner, as an example.
Maybe we'll see where Sheepyard takes this. It'll be interesting for sure.
All right, so that's all of the updates to existing cards, but we're not done yet. So, Baiku, we have a new card.
The long awaited next temple, the temple of the mind,
So, the
mind.
Shadowfen one, right?
No, this is actually a neutral common card, which works further with the fixedly forward mechanic that was introduced with the headless hotheads.
Hmm,
It's a 3 mana tower with 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 strength, so
okay,
pretty decent stats
not
for the
bad.
mana cost, yeah. At the start of your turn, give fixedly forward movement to a random non hero unit card from your hand. Then kill all friendly confused units. So it does a couple of different things there. The first thing is hand buff. Does it wear off when you cycle the card, when you play the card? Both, neither. We kind of don't know anything about it yet, but it will at least give something in your hand fixedly forward. Non hero, because I assume they're really worried about what you would do with Siren when that happens. Um,
Not Ubis. They're not really worried about fixedly forward Ubis.
he'll go fixedly forward eventually. Actually, that's a very good point. I think the only legendary with that can move multiple squares is a Siren. No, Tigor still is a thing also. Yeah, so
Yeah, Tiger.
so there's
Okay.
a- there's a couple that it could work with, but I go to units that move multiple tiles because that's the use case that it seems to be best for. You want it for runners, you want it for hearth guards, you want it
Mm.
for grim couriers, maybe, right? Like a three movement that's cheap and just shoot straight up the board. Maybe the new eternal ethereals or ethereal eternals with the new 8 mana 3 movement ancient that was just introduced. I could definitely see a
Okay.
use case there.
Mia would trigger this. So for
Correct.
5 mana, you could give your Hearth Guards fixedly forward
You have a
and
little
a
more
tower.
control over it. Yep, if you have Mia, for sure. And you're right, this is a structure, a cheap structure. So you do
Mm-hmm.
kind of want to pair it with Hearth Guards. It's something you could try to work with. Maybe you could use it with something cheap. We've always talked about how Swarm has an advantage having Doppelbox because it moves their front in contested areas where kind of nothing else does. Well, now gifted recruits could move in the same way as Doppelbox, right?
Yeah, I wonder what happens in a situation where, like, let's say I play it early because of whatever, and it hits the card I want. And I know we've already said we don't know what happens in this situation, but it hit the card I want. Am I now stuck having to hold that card in my hand until the turn I want to use it?
Gosh, I hope not.
Right? Or can I just cycle it and it'll still be fixedly forward when it comes back? Because if I have to hold it in hand, this could be a detriment at times. You could just be like, I'm glad it hit that, but I need it to hit that 2 turns from now, sort of a thing.
Exactly. It would really mess up your cycling. So we'll have to see how this goes. And then the other part of this, killing all friendly confused units.
Yeah.
I'm not
Okay.
really sure why confusion is not really particularly viable or popular right now.
Well, it is after everyone starts playing Temple of the Mind. Excited Mousers gets really good really fast.
There you go.
It's the best AoE in the game. You play Reign of Reign of Frogs, Excited Mousers, hit go. Oh my god, that would be so dumb. Yeah, I'm not sure like what the thought process was about. I mean, I guess if it was destroy all your opponent's units with confusion, now we've got a real tower for the confusion mechanic. This is starting to get sexy. But it's all your own units that are confused. When's that even going to happen?
When your opponent plays the new Sly Boot.
I love hand buffing. Hand buffing was like hand buff paladin back in Hearthstone days. One of my favorite decks. Just so much fun. I hope we see a lot more of this. Things that impact the stats in your hand is awesome. So that part of it I am super excited about. The confusion thing, well, it's confusing.
Ayo. All right. I want to point out that this card is available July 2nd, not July 1st.
Mm.
So hold on to your end of season coins before you buy Noble Books if you are interested in getting this card.
It actually, funny enough, this card on July 2nd and Headless Hotheads are the only 2 cards in the game I don't currently have a copy of. So I don't have any fixedly forward.
Well, for
My
only
units.
$10, you can get 10 copies of the Temple of Mind along with coins and fusion stones.
Hmm. I will consider it. All right, let's move on from there because this next section, Subaiku, is the section I am most excited about.
We took way too long to get into here, but there are updates to the brawls.
And the wait was worth it, folks.
Following the revamp of the Brawl from June,
Mm.
this release is going to bring 4 new and unique Brawl modifiers.
First
So,
confusion. No.
as we talked about, and as we have been playing for the month of June, there are now 3 levels of Brawl, Casual, Warrior, and Ultimate. But all the Brawl modifiers were still the same old ones we've been playing, and the fact that they were level constrained made them a little more interesting. I'm thinking specifically of the Aftershock Brawl, where the structures with a
Yeah.
level 1 Mia instead of a level 5 Mia really required a lot more planning and a lot more positioning strategy from your opponent. Not from me, because I never had a level 5 Mia, so I always had to think about it. uh, but now we get some new Brawl modifiers. The first one, Pure Amalgamation.
Oh, gosh, I love this. Both players are forced to play the same deck at the same levels. The deck will be randomly composed of 6 cards one of the players chose to put in their deck and 6 cards from the other player's deck. There's no duplicates. So if both of you have gifted recruits and it chooses gifted recruits from both of you, if one of you has a higher level, it'll go with the higher level version.
What you said there, both players are forced to play the same deck.
Yes, exact same deck.
It's not like you're getting half of your deck and half of your opponent's deck, and your opponent gets the other half.
Nope.
You both get the same halves of each deck, which is
Card for
just going to
card.
be weird.
Mm-hmm. The best part about it, neither of you know what you have until the game starts.
That's right. So you'll be going through the deck, cycling away cards, and that's your clue as to what your opponent could be playing.
Yes, but how
Because,
do you cycle? What do you like? Do I have a better card in the deck to play here than this?
oh, great point. I have 4 mana. I have, say, Gifted Recruits and Lawless Herd. Well, do I want to throw that away trying to get something like Saber Paws because I want movement? Or do I just say, you know what? I can fill my curve and that's good
Good
enough.
enough. I know. I'm staring. I'm like, I have 1 card I can play on 4 mana, and I have like 2 5 mana cards. At least I know I can throw one away and keep the other, right? But in a situation where everything's heavy and I've got 1 5, and it's like, if I throw it back, do I get anything better, or am I
I
just
can play Ubis at my baseline for no value, or I can throw it away and try to get something which might be even worse.
I love this idea. The worst part about it, though, in terms of giving me a headache, is I'm trying to decide, is it more advantageous to just throw a whole bunch of guns in a deck and say, let's go? Or is it more advantageous to like try to build a deck with like avian stalkers and wetland deceivers and just a bunch of bad stuff and say, okay, let's see
But
where
you
the chips
can't give
fall?
bad stuff to your opponent because you get the same bad cards in your deck.
Well, yeah, but I was planning on playing with bad cards in the
Well,
first place.
what if they do the same thing and your whole deck is
No.
avian stalkers and chillbeards?
Oh my, and then you find out like you don't even realize that's happening until you notice that the Chillbeards is level 4, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not my Chillbeards, that's his. Oh gosh, I this is going to be a barrel of laughs. If nothing else, I think it's going to be incredibly funny and fun. There's going to be combinations of stuff. The crazy thing about it is it's going to be multi faction.
Right.
It'll be half Shadowfen and half Swarm, or whatever the 2 factions are. That's super exciting. Never been done before. There's going to be combinations of cards no one's thought up that have suddenly are in play.
And you can't plan for it. That's the
No,
worst part.
no, you can.
It's not like you can say, okay, I want this Venom Fall Spire from Shadowfen because I'm putting together a Mia deck. You can't plan for that sort of thing because you never
Correct.
know what you're going to queue into,
Or even which half of your deck is going to show up.
right? You're playing a winter deck and you think to yourself, all right, I got my freezes, I got my Shyvana. Well, what do you do if Shyvana's not in your deck? What do you do
Just
if Shyvana is in your deck and your opponent also has Shyvana?
Yeah, exactly. And neither of you have freezes, so you just have a 4 mana 8/0. Good luck. One thing about this that I am rather excited about, and I haven't heard yet, I hope that these become modifiers to the friendly challenge screen, because I could see you and I just like getting bored one night and putting an hour or two into trying to create Mia decks with other towers or whatever it is, like just like crazy combinations like that. Like, cue it up. Do we have the right cards? No. Okay, undo it. Start again.
And get that Mia and Tower of Focus
Oh
synergy.
yes.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting. It's not as random, I think, as people are fearing because you're playing the same deck as your opponent. It's really going to come down to yes, who draws better, but also who adapts their play style better, who
Exactly.
understands what the cards are capable of better, and who positions better.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this is actually one of the most skill-intensive brawls that are out there, because there isn't even necessarily a guarantee of some sort of overpowered. None of the cards are or none of the stats are improved. So it's not like it's a 2 mana, sharp fist or whatever. These are just standard stats. So
Yeah.
it really will come down to skill level of play and adaptability.
Kind of like a draft bound deal, I guess, maybe.
Yeah,
Like a
yeah, I
draft
think
bound where
so.
you don't quite get the synergies that you were hoping for.
Exactly. All right, moving on from pure amalgamation, which by the way will be the only brawl this coming time. All three will exist. Effectively equals the warrior and the ultimate. So you'll be able to play it at any one of the three levels, but it will be the same exact brawl this coming week. After that, we have Fights of Threes. Subaiku, what is this?
A player cannot place more than 3 units on the board.
Hmm.
I don't know if this means that if you play a fourth unit, it will destroy one of the units on the board. If it does, would that be random or would that be the first one played on the board? Would it be the one furthest ahead, the one furthest behind? Or can you just, you have 3 on the board, you can't play another one until one of them dies? We don't really know how this is going to go yet. Uh, but you definitely don't want a ton of units to get together in your deck. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with a lot of cards you can't use.
We do know that if you play spells that generate units, that's okay until it's more than three. The spell still goes off. You still spend the mana, and then the unit, like from Summon Militia or Call for Aid or Head Start, the unit just gets destroyed. So in those cases, we know the spell can be played, and the unit is then scrapped, the one that is generated from the spell. So yeah, we don't know what happens when you try to play a unit, though.
Nope. I definitely see this going in the structure and buff
Mm-hmm.
direction, right? Like I see this
Sure.
being a very ironclad heavy brawl. I think you're going to want something like Siege Assembly and Mia, Upgrade Point, and a few constructs,
Okay.
Fort Tonic, Boosting Elixir, right? These are all things where you can put units on the board and take advantage of them in order to play spells.
Yep.
But
Yep.
maybe you go a different way. Maybe you go hard into the winter, right? Winter
Yep.
spells to stall, underground springs for life gain. You
Not
know,
where I thought you were going. I was going to say cons runners because it turns out when the runners go into base, they don't count as units on the board anymore.
oh, good point. Good point. No, I was thinking about cons runners for the next brawl.
Ooh.
Thin No Man's Land. The
Okay.
initial front line starts on the second row instead of the first and cannot fall lower than the second row. So rather than starting on your baseline, you're starting one row out. And
Ooh.
to me, this says jam the deck full of runners and go.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think both of these are good for runners decks. Then No Man's Land. I've got to think about this. So anything that you play on turn one with movement ends up in the middle of the board, literally the middle row of the board.
Correct.
That's crazy.
If you've got 4 mana and you have GP and Shady Ghoul, say, you can just go right onto your opponent's baseline.
Saber Paws and GP to open, Saber Paws and Gifted for oof, yeah.
Saber Paws and Restless Goat, you've already done damage.
Well, that's just the way Swarm likes to play it. All right, so that is going to be
Now, the
quick
front line
games.
starts on the second row. That doesn't mean you have to play on the second row. You can still choose to play on your baseline if you want
Okay,
to be a
yeah.
little more conservative, if you're playing something a little slower,
Or a tower.
or if it's positionally advantageous for you to do so.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would not be trying to stick a tower though. It's just so much easier for your opponent to clear.
Yeah, that's true.
Less
It
space
is.
for them to go.
Hmm.
I like that they're introducing this brawl that plays with the front line. We've talked so much on this podcast about how cards that play with the board and play with positioning are interesting and take advantage of the unique mechanics of this game.
Yeah.
And this is another way to do it, right? Play with the Brawl modifiers in such a way that it plays with the board rather than the cards. I would so much rather have things that mess with frontline than it's just here's another 4 strength for pirates or 2 movement for all the frostlings.
Yeah, none of the brawls that we've described so far, in fact, none of the new brawls change mana or stats of units, which is really cool.
Yep, they're all playing with cards and playing with the board, which is neat.
Moving from there into our last one, speaking of just throw a confusion modifier into the brawl, Sheepyard already heard us and they said, sure, fine. How about this? Stunning attack. Sabaiku, what is stunning attack?
Units get confused on receiving any damage. This is gonna be nuts,
I want to play Rain of Frogs in that brawl.
right? Just load up Azure Hatcher and let your opponent get pinged by frogs, and all their units are moving around at random, and they have no idea what's going on.
Blade Storm.
Play play Ubis. Any unit that gets pinged gets confused.
Oh my gosh, the poison tower.
Oh,
Oh
Venom Fall
dear.
Spire. Yeah, you're gonna see some
Oh no.
poison work
Oh
here. That's a
no.
really good point.
Gosh, that would be amazing.
Do not play Heliotroopers in that deck.
No, no, no. Heliotroopers will never move forward after the first turn. Yeah, good point. um, so that one's going to be super fun as well. And it turns out there's also going to be an update to the loss counter that we want to talk about real quick. The loss counter, last time we discussed it, I mentioned that it's just adding to my anxiety of playing on Brawl, especially once you get above 50 crowns. They're changing it though, Sabaiku. It looks like the plan is hopefully mid-July to change it from the 3 strikes and you reset to something a little different.
Yeah, we don't know too much about it right now. Some screens were shared on the Discord, so definitely go into there and look for posts from Brzoja if you're interested. Right now, all we know is that the loss counter is turning into a heart counter in preparation. What that means is up in the air, but we'll get another update to the Brawl game mode soon. Hopefully, it makes things a little more interesting. I gotta say, this really seems like the direction that Sheepyard wants to go, where they're just over the last month just really changing the Brawl game mode rather than the ranked game mode. They're saying, yeah, you guys can have your fun little Heroes League if you're interested in that sort of competition, but let us show you the cool things that we are working on and the cool ideas that we have.
Well, it's yeah. These are from the leaks in Stormbound. Basically, what's going to happen is at some point during the brawl, after a victory, you can choose a victory bonus. So you lose hearts. It appears when you lose a game, but after you win a game, you might be able to choose, for example, a power up, a life up, so that you replenish one of your damaged hearts to kind of give you, more losses before you run out, kind of a thing. Other options that you might be able to get, for example, are improvements to your fortress. So that if you're like a base health 18 or base health 19, and you're just like, I'm going up against all 20s, well, win a couple of times in the brawl, get to your first couple of victory bonuses, select tower improvement if you get that as an option, and boom, now you're a base health 20 for the remainder of your brawl run as well. At least that's what it appears from what he shared again in the Discord.
And he did say in the Discord also that you are capped at the base health cap for the Brawl. It's not like you can continue getting base health upgrades. So
Oh gosh, yeah.
you're not a base health 30 playing against base health 20s. That doesn't work.
That would be pretty amazing. But this concept feels a lot like the dungeon runs from Hearthstone, right? You remember how you kind of like you started your run, and as you won, you could win rewards, better cards, better stats, better whatever, so that your ensuing games you had a little bit more of an advantage.
Yeah, it introduces kind of like a roguelike mechanic into this where you're kind of building up as you go. The difference there being obviously in a roguelike, you're trying to learn as you go so that when you die, you can do better next time. You don't really get that option here. You're just going to run out of hearts and no longer partake in the brawl, apparently.
Do we know if that's true? I don't know. I didn't
No,
see.
I believe running out of heart will just reset you to the previous milestone in the
Right.
same way that 3 strikes right now resets you to the previous milestone.
In all honesty, this I find incredible. Like the new brawls, and now this new sort of extra added feature. I have to tell you, I almost feel like ranked mode is going to become something to do to grind for gold, so you can play more Brawl. Like I'm really excited about this.
Like the Brawl is Stormbound 2.0.
Yeah, kind of like that's why you play the game for the brawl because this sounds so much more exciting, and you just kind of grind for gold during the rest of the week to be able to afford a deep dungeon run, a deep brawl run.
Yeah, it really for me depends very much on the modifiers. There are some I enjoy
Hmm.
more than others. I do hope they continue bringing out new ones to keep it fresh. I'm very excited to play with all of these, except for maybe the confusion one. That's going to be a mess.
It's gonna be so much fun though.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I am looking forward to see where they take the brawl, and hopefully, really in just a couple weeks, we'll know more.
Well, we have pushed this basically as long as we dare go for a single episode. Unfortunately, that means we're going to have to postpone our card of the week, which I won't spoil. You'll have to listen to next episode to learn about it. And now instead, it's the end of the main portion of the episode, which means it's time for me to remind you to please contact us, preferably in our channel on the Stormbound Discord server, on Twitter at Brewed Sages, and you can always email us, mkm at thebrewedsages@gmail.com. We also have an additional way for you to reach out and support us. We do have a Gumroad account where you can become patrons of our work. Check out the link on our Stormbound Kitty page. This week we did hear from Ubermensch, who said Ironclad could be so much more fun if its whole mechanic were about the positioning, wind makers, Elof, Temple of Space, sound drivers, purifiers. I definitely not hate it as much as I do now. Great insight, guys. Those are some of the more intriguing mechanics in the game. I really do love board positioning stuff. And then Joshua H says, "Hi guys, just recently started listening to the Brood Sages. Well, thank you very much. But great episode, and thanks for the shout out, Subaiku. I thought the discussion on how rotating 3 or 4 cards from your deck doesn't really change the core of your deck was very interesting. I've been trying, not very successfully, I might add, to combat this by attempting to avoid using green prototypes and gifted recruits this season. And boy, has it been difficult. It definitely feels more rewarding when I win the occasional match, though. Thanks for taking the time and effort for this episode. Good luck in your fights." Well, that's going to do it for this episode. For Subaiku, I am Freeloader. We are the Brood Sages reminding you to stay hydrated.